The sun dipped low over the quiet town of Willowbrook, casting long shadows across the cobblestone streets. The air was thick with the scent of blooming jasmine, and the faint hum of cicadas filled the evening silence. In a modest house at the end of Maple Lane, a man named Ethan Harper sat on his porch, his face etched with exhaustion. He had just returned from his second job of the day, his hands calloused and his shoulders heavy. But despite the weariness, there was a faint smile on his lips. He was a man who believed in hard work, in building a future, in love. Ethan had everything he thought he needed: a steady job, a roof over his head, and a wife who made his heart skip a beat every time she smiled at him. Clara Harper was his world, his anchor. She was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her laughter, the kind who sent him sweet texts during the day, reminding him to eat, to take care of himself, to come home safe. He trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? She was his wife, his partner, his everything. But trust, as Ethan would soon learn, can be a fragile thing. It started with a neighbor. Old Mr. Thompson, who lived 2 doors down, was the kind of man who spent his days rocking on his porch, watching the world go by. He wasn't one for gossip, which made what he said next all the more unsettling. "Ethan," Mr. Thompson called out one evening, his voice low and hesitant. "I don't mean to stir up trouble, but I've seen something you ought to know." Ethan paused, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What is it, Mr. Thompson?" The old man shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his eyes darting around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "It's Clara. She's been bringing a man home. While you're at work." Ethan laughed, a short, disbelieving sound. "A man? Nah, you must be mistaken. That's probably just her cousin or a friend from work." But Mr. Thompson didn't laugh. He didn't even smile. Instead, he gave Ethan a look that sent a chill down his spine. "I don't think so, son. I've seen him a few times. Same guy. Always when you're not around." Ethan's smile faltered. He shook his head, trying to dismiss the old man's words, but they lingered in his mind like a stubborn stain. That night, as he lay in bed beside Clara, her soft breathing filling the room, he couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. Days turned into weeks, and the seed of doubt Mr. Thompson had planted began to grow. Ethan tried to ignore it, to convince himself that Clara would never betray him. But the thought gnawed at him, relentless and unyielding. Finally, he decided he needed to know the truth. He bought a few small cameras, the kind that stored footage on memory cards, and discreetly placed them around the house. He hated himself for it, for doubting the woman he loved, but he needed to be sure. The first few days of footage showed nothing unusual, just Clara going about her day, cooking, cleaning, watching TV. Ethan felt a wave of relief. He was about to delete the recordings and forget the whole thing when he saw it. Clara, standing in their living room, pouring 2 glasses of wine. A man walked in, someone Ethan had never seen before. He wasn't a relative. He wasn't a friend. He was a stranger. And the way Clara greeted him, the way she smiled, the way she leaned into his touch, made Ethan's stomach churn. He watched, his heart pounding, as the man kissed her, as they moved to the couch, as they disappeared upstairs to the bedroom Ethan had shared with Clara for years. He felt like he was drowning, the air thick and suffocating. He paused the video, his hands trembling, and closed his eyes. Ethan didn't confront Clara. He didn't scream, didn't cry, didn't demand an explanation. Instead, he made a decision. He would leave, but not just leave. He would disappear. Completely. He started by quietly siphoning money from their joint account, a little at a time, so Clara wouldn't notice. He opened a private account, transferred his share of their savings, and closed their credit cards. He quit his jobs, telling his bosses he was moving on to new opportunities. And through it all, Clara remained oblivious, still bringing the man into their home, still lying to Ethan's face. The night before he left, Ethan sat in their living room for the last time. He looked around at the life they had built together, at the memories that now felt like a cruel joke. He reached for his wedding ring, the symbol of a love that had never been real, and slipped it off his finger. At 4:30 a.m., with a bag slung over his shoulder, Ethan stepped out the door and didn't look back. Clara woke up to an empty bed. At first, she thought nothing of it, but as the hours passed and Ethan didn't return, panic set in. She called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. She called his workplace, only to be told he had quit weeks ago. She rushed to the bank and found their joint account drained. Ethan was gone, and he had made sure there was no trace of him left behind. Years later, Ethan had built a new life on a small island in the Caribbean. He had a wife who truly loved him, a daughter who was his entire world, and a peace he had never known before. He had moved on, leaving the past behind. But the past has a way of catching up with you. One day, as Ethan stood in a bustling market, holding his daughter's hand, he felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw Clara, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Ethan," she whispered, his name barely escaping her lips. He looked at her, his expression calm and unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice steady. "Do I know you?" The words hit her like a slap. She blinked, her eyes filling with tears, but Ethan didn't wait for a response. He took his daughter's hand and walked away, leaving Clara standing there, her past crumbling around her. Ethan never looked back. Some betrayals, after all, are not meant to be forgiven, only forgotten. What would you have done in Ethan's place? Would you have confronted Clara? Would you have left the way he did? Or would you have handled things differently? Let us know in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to share it with someone who might need to hear it. Sometimes, the hardest choices lead to the greatest peace.